I was watching my neighbor's 7-year-old the other morning, sitting on the porch with a bowl of cereal. He looked like any other kid, messy hair, slightly mismatched socks. But then he started talking. Not about cartoons or Minecraft, but about the specific macroeconomic triggers of the 1929 stock market crash. He wasn't reciting a script, he was analyzing it, his small voice coolly explaining the collapse of the gold standard while he chased a stray Cheerio around his bowl. He hadn't spent a single day in a history class. He'd just woken up from a knowledge sink provided by his BCI. At first, it's hard not to feel a surge of envy. We've spent our lives grinding years of library marathons, the literal pain of trying to wrap our brains around a new language or a complex equation. Here was a child who had bypassed the struggle entirely. He possessed the structural knowledge of a university graduate before he'd even lost all his baby teeth. It felt like a miracle, the ultimate shortcut to human potential. But as I sat there, a realization started to settle in, and it was deeply unsettling. The kid knew everything, but he understood nothing. He could tell you the exact unemployment stats of the Great Depression down to the decimal point. Yet he had no concept of what it felt like to be hungry, or the gnawing terror of watching a life's savings vanish. His brain was a top-tier storage drive, packed with sterile, high-definition data, but his experience was a blank slate. It made me wonder, what happens to a society when the knowing part of us becomes a cheap, pre-installed utility, like the operating system on your phone? When an Ivy League education is just a basic software update available at birth, the value of everything we've built, our degrees, our careers, our very sense of merit evaporates. We are entering the twilight of an age where being smart made you special. We're moving into a world where your only worth lies in the one thing a machine can't download, the spark to actually do something with the data.
Right. And the mission before us today is really to map this irreversible shift in the human condition. I mean, we are standing at the absolute convergence of brain-computer interfaces, super intelligent AI, and advanced neurotechnology.
Yeah, it's not just a hypothetical anymore.
No, it is not merely a technological upgrade that you can just opt out of. It's an ontological rupture, a fundamental tearing of what it means to actually be a conscious entity. We need to meticulously examine the total collapse of traditional knowledge systems, the dawn of this terrifying biological class warfare that's dictated entirely by cognitive architecture, and frankly, the geopolitical weaponization of the human mind itself.
Which is heavy.
It is, because the trajectory of human augmentation is actively rewriting the boundaries of identity, of agency. We are rapidly moving toward a reality where the human brain is no longer a sanctuary. You know, it's a contested, heavily militarized domain.
Yeah, that transition you just mentioned from the brain as a private sanctuary to the brain as just obsolete hardware is happening right now in spaces we used to consider like the pinnacle of human intellect. To really feel the sheer friction of this old biological world colliding with the synthetic reality, you have to look at a man named Arthur. He's 62 years old, a senior quantitative analyst.
Right, the traditional Wall Street archetype.
Exactly. His office in Boston, it literally smells like dust, aged leather bindings, and just the creeping rot of obsolescence.
Yeah.
And he is sitting behind this massive mahogany desk, staring across it at a 19-year-old intern.
Okay.
And the intern is currently executing a multi-layered derivative audit. Now, this is a labyrinthine task. I mean, it requires navigating intersecting global market fluctuations, obscure contradictory tax codes across dozens of sovereign nations, and doing predictive nonlinear risk modeling.
Which is virtually impossible for a standard human brain to do quickly.
Right. This specific audit is the exact kind of cognitive mountain that took Arthur 40 years of grueling, high-stakes, ulcer-inducing experience to learn how to climb.
Yeah.
But the intern sitting across from him isn't a savant. He isn't even really paying attention to the screen. He's running a Wall Street quantitative V.9 neural lace package.
And we really need to be very precise about what that neural lace is physically doing in that moment.
Yeah.
It is not a screen he's looking at. It is a mesh of microscopic electrodes integrated directly into his cerebral cortex.
Which is why Arthur is sitting there, and this cold, sharp tremor starts in his hands. Because he's watching the intern's eyes.
Ah, the microsaccades.
They are slightly glazed over, flicking rapidly in these involuntary microscopic eye twitches. The intern's biological eyes are attempting to track millions of data points a second that are being projected directly into his visual cortex by the implant.
Completely bypassing his conscious, deliberative thought process.
Exactly. The hardware is pulling raw data, synthesizing it, and feeding the conclusions straight into the intern's prefrontal cortex as fully formed intuitions. So Arthur, desperate to prove that human experience still holds weight, tries to recall a highly specific, obscure legal precedent from the 1994 bond crisis to test the kid.
A veteran's trap.
It's a trap only a veteran would know to look for. But before the electrochemical signal can even travel across the synapses in Arthur's unaugmented hippocampus to retrieve the memory, the intern yawns. In Yawn, the intern casually states the exact 1994 precedent, details its subsequent overturning in an appellate court in 2008, and simultaneously applies its real-time mathematical implications to the audit they are running.
See, the time frame there is the crucial mechanic. The intern didn't actually remember the 1994 precedent, you know?
Right, because he wasn't even born.
Exactly. The AI integrated into his neural lace, predicted the necessity of the precedent based on the audit's parameters, retrieved the data from an external quantum server, and localized it into the intern's working memory faster than human biology can fire a single action potential.
And in that fraction of a second, Arthur is utterly destroyed. I mean, the profound tragedy in that mahogany office isn't just that Arthur is going to be forced into early retirement.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It is the visceral, humiliating, bone-deep realization that he is a master of a dead craft. He's a master clockmaker in the age of atomic time. He's clutching at dignity that no longer possesses a market value.
Yeah.
His entire identity, an identity built on the foundational human premise that intellectual labor, grind, and hard-won knowledge command respect and authority, has evaporated. It vanished in the span of an afternoon, replaced by a teenager who simply bought the right software license.
What Arthur is experiencing is the absolute unmitigated devaluation of intellectual labor. And it's driven by a fundamental physiological shift in the human cognitive paradigm.
Which changes everything about how we value people.
Historically, human civilization has valued the biological mind primarily as a storage drive. You know, the ability to retain, recall, and cross-reference vast amounts of localized information was the ultimate bottleneck of human progress.
Right. The smartest guy in the room was the one who remembered the most facts.
Exactly. Those who possessed superior biological storage and retrieval capacities, scholars, analysts, doctors, they were rewarded with elite societal status. But when a BCI allows a 19-year-old to download the equivalent of a dual doctorate in financial mathematics and international law overnight, the human mind permanently ceases to be valuable as a storage medium.
So what does it become?
It transitions entirely into a processor role. Yuval Noah Harari articulated the exact stakes of this transition when he stated, and this is a direct quote, "We are in the middle of an arms race to hack the human brain. The currency of the new economy is not data, it's creativity and critical thinking."
Bam.
We are seeing the rapid, undeniable, and aggressive progression of this reality right now.
And it started so innocuously. You know, you look at Neuralink's early human trials, beginning with patients like Nolan Arbaugh. We watched a man paralyzed from the shoulders down utilize an implant to control digital environments with thought alone, to pursue a degree, to play games.
It was universally hailed as a medical miracle.
Right. But those were merely the crude, foundational, socially acceptable steps.
Because the stated goal of the medical community was restoring baseline human functions, sight, speech, motor control. But the architecture required to bridge a severed spinal cord is the exact same architecture required to actively expand cognitive bandwidth.
It's the same wire.
It's the same wire. The moment the technology proved it could reliably interpret and transmit neural telemetry, the threshold was crossed. The moment knowledge is no longer scarce, the entire economic foundation of human meritocracy disintegrates.
So if knowledge itself is infinitely abundant, if you essentially have a localized supercomputer pre-installed in your prefrontal cortex, capable of perfectly answering any empirical question, what actually retains value? It forces a total bifurcation of human society. We are looking at a permanent structural split into two distinct, irreconcilable groups. First, you have what we can call the prompters.
The prompter.
Yeah. These are the individuals who possess that elusive, undownloadable spark you just mentioned. The ability to ask creative, interdisciplinary, wildly novel questions.
The ones driving the machine, essentially.
Right. They are the ones who can look at the infinite, sterile expanse of pre-installed data and find the one impossible, illogical connection that the algorithm wasn't programmed to look for.
They are the architects of inquiry. The system provides the answers, but the prompters dictate the direction of human expansion.
Exactly. And then you have the second group, the executors. And this will be the vast, overwhelming, suffocating majority of humanity.
Which is a chilling thought.
They're reduced to fleshy calculators. I mean, they have the Library of Alexandria housed in the temporal lobes of their skulls, but they entirely lack the spark to generate original inquiry. They exist in the state of permanent cognitive stasis.
Functioning merely as biological rendering engines.
Yes, just waiting for an external AI or a human prompter to issue a command for them to execute. In this new paradigm, the most expensive, highly sought-after commodities on Earth are no longer intellectual or academic. They become intensely physical and deeply, stubbornly irrational.
Irrationality becomes a premium.
Physical trust, the tangible warmth of personal charisma, the literal physical weight of a handshake in a room, and above all, highly irrational artistic or entrepreneurial gut feelings, the spontaneous leaps of logic that defy algorithmic prediction.
Because the machine can do the logic perfectly.
Right. If a machine or a basic neural sync can execute any logical sequence flawlessly, logic itself becomes a cheap commodity. The illogical, the uniquely human instinct becomes the premium asset.
The systemic reduction of the majority of the population into executors introduces a mechanism we really must define, which is the human API.
The human API. Yeah.
Well, in software engineering, an application programming interface, or API, is a set of protocols that allows one computer program to extract specific data or functionality from another program without ever needing to understand its internal underlying workings.
You just send a request and get an answer back.
You send a formatted request, you receive a formatted result. When the unsparked human is fully integrated with a superintelligent AI via a neural lace, they become exactly this, a biological plug-in.
I want to make sure the mechanics of this are crystal clear for you listening. You're saying that the human being is stripped of their autonomy and treated like a piece of external hardware by the very software inside their head.
It is worse than that, actually. The AI, or the corporate framework governing the AI, doesn't need to engage with the human's desires, their history, their moral compass, or their consciousness. It simply pings the human neural architecture for a specific cognitive task.
Just pings the brain.
Yes. Perhaps there is a highly complex visual pattern recognition sequence that still benefits slightly from the chaotic, highly parallel wetware of the biological human brain compared to a linear silicon processor.
So it uses us for our wetware.
Right. The AI sends the visual data into the human's optic nerve, forces the human's occipital lobe to process the pattern, extracts the neurological conclusion, and moves on. The human, as an autonomous, self-determining agent, is entirely bypassed. They are a passive host.
Terrifying.
It demands a deeply uncomfortable examination of identity itself. If your brain is functioning primarily as a routing node for an external superintelligence processing complex requests and outputting solutions without your conscious, deliberate engagement, where does your identity actually live?
Are you the author of your thoughts or just the biological hardware hosting them? And we don't even have to look to some distant dystopian cyberpunk future to see the architectural precursors of this human API model. We are laying the groundwork for algorithmic cognitive management right now, today, in modern classrooms.
With the neurofeedback systems.
Yes. The deployment of neurofeedback systems, the headbands and early non-invasive EEG monitors used to track student attention levels, is already normalizing the idea that the human mind is a measurable, manageable, and extractable resource.
Right, because these systems take the invisible, deeply internal, and entirely subjective processes of focus, distraction, and cognitive fatigue, and they render them visible as raw, real-time data streams for teachers and administrators.
Think about what that actually means for a child. A student is no longer just staring out the window lost in a daydream, which historically is where a massive amount of human creativity originates.
Right, idle thought is crucial.
Instead, their neural telemetry is actively flagging their brainwave frequencies as disengaged on a teacher's tablet. The system detects a drop in beta waves and a spike in alpha waves, and it prompts an immediate algorithmic intervention.
A red light flashes.
An alert is sent. We are actively, systematically training a generation to accept that their deepest, most intimate cognitive states are not private sanctuaries. They are data points to be optimized, corrected, and disciplined by external algorithmic authorities.
Conditioning them.
Exactly. We are conditioning them from childhood to be the perfect, compliant nodes for the human API network.
And this conditioning inevitably leads to the materialization of profound, inescapable structural inequality. It actively shifts the primary battleground of human stratification from the economic domain entirely to the biological domain.
The biological domain.
The current digital divide, which has defined the last few decades, characterized by unequal access to hardware, broadband, and digital literacy, is rapidly evolving into an irreversible neuro-divide.
Irreversible.
Completely. We are facing the concrete emergence of what political scientist Francis Fukuyama termed a post-human caste. Historically, social stratification has been dictated by material wealth, geographic luck, or institutional access. These barriers are incredibly formidable, yes, but they are theoretically permeable.
You can cross them, sometimes.
Right. Social mobility, however rare, exists. An impoverished child can, through immense effort or luck, gain access to a library, learn a skill, and alter their socioeconomic trajectory.
Democracy.
In theory. However, when stratification is based on hardwired cognitive architecture, when the wealthy elite possess literally superior neurological processing speeds, expanded local memory capacities, and AI-augmented pattern recognition built into their physical brains, upward mobility for the unaugmented becomes a biological impossibility.
You literally can't compete.
The global economy officially transitions into neurocapitalism. Cognitive capital becomes the primary baseline economic asset. If you cannot afford the elite neural upgrades, you are not merely disadvantaged in the job market. You are fundamentally biologically incapable of perceiving, understanding, or participating in the high-level cognitive economy.
Locked out completely.
You are relegated to a permanent, unupgradable underclass, permanently locked out of the trajectory of human progress by the limitations of your own unaltered biology.
That biological bottleneck you just mentioned, we can already see what it looks like when a human mind hits it. Picture the sprawling, neon-choked, rain-slicked outskirts of Seattle. Elena is sitting in her cramped, damp apartment, rubbing her temples.
Okay.
She is intimately acquainted with the dull, physical throbbing of the biological glass ceiling. She works as a mid-level logistics coordinator. Her socioeconomic status, her debt-to-income ratio, affords her only a basic Tier 3 BCI subscription.
And we really must define what Tier 3 entails in this economy.
Yeah.
It grants her basic spatial reasoning enhancements to optimize cargo loading and flawless, instantaneous translation of standard supply chain communication protocols. It gives her just enough processing power to remain efficient at moving freight for her employer, nothing more.
It's an occupational tool, not an enlightenment engine. But Elena is curious. One evening, sitting in the dark, she attempts to process a smuggled, unlicensed philosophical essay she found on an encrypted darknet forum.
A dangerous curiosity.
It's a dense, highly complex treatise on existential autonomy and systemic biological inequality. She starts to read. But the moment her brain attempts to deeply engage with the abstract, multi-layered theoretical concepts, the cognitive throttle kicks in.
And it is vital to understand how that throttle functions biologically. It is not a digital firewall popping up on a screen saying access denied.
No.
The proprietary firmware in her implant actively monitors her neural pathways. When it detects her prefrontal cortex attempting to synthesize abstract conceptual networks outside her licensed peer, it initiates a localized electrical dampening sequence.
Physically stops the thought.
It actively suppresses the necessary synaptic firing in Wernicke's area and the frontal lobes.
It manifests as physical pain. It is an engineered, localized migraine blooming relentlessly behind her eyes. Her neural architecture literally lacks the licensed paid-for bandwidth to process the thought. The hardware forces her to stop thinking. She drops the tablet, gasping, holding her head. Meanwhile, through her streaked window, she watches the transit rails carrying the apex-tier citizens moving through the elevated upper levels of the city. She can see them.
The post-human caste.
Right. Their eyes occasionally glow with the faint, telltale blue light of creative synthesis modules. Those elite, heavily restricted modules allow them to effortlessly perceive multidimensional patterns in theoretical physics or generate breathtaking, complex symphonies in real time within their own minds.
Experiences she is biologically barred from having.
Exactly. The inequality separating Lena from those people on the transit rail isn't in their bank accounts or their zip codes anymore. The inequality is woven into the very physical texture of her consciousness. She is a prisoner trapped inside the bone of her own skull, legally, financially, and biologically barred from experiencing the full spectrum of human thought.
Elena's situation perfectly and horrifyingly illustrates the gilded cage scenario of advanced neurocapitalism. In this highly probable, rapidly approaching future, brain-computer interfaces are not developed as open-source utilities designed for universal human flourishing.
No, they're products.
They are proprietary, closed, highly regulated systems controlled by massive corporate oligarchies. Now, these corporations will offer immense, undeniably miraculous benefits.
Sure, curing diseases.
Right. The total eradication of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, flawless, real-time emotional regulation to eliminate clinical depression, and absolute frictionless economic productivity. But these benefits are extracted through a terminal Faustian bargain.
Behavioral compliance.
Absolute behavioral compliance. By utilizing the proprietary neural lace, the individual surrenders their most intimate foundational data. We are talking about their raw, unfiltered, pre-vocalized thoughts.
Things you haven't even said out loud yet.
Things you haven't even consciously realized yet. Their pre-conscious desires, mapped before they even realize they want something. Their minute emotional fluctuations, tracked via precise dopamine and serotonin release metrics.
That's the end of privacy entirely.
This is the terminal, ultimate conclusion of surveillance capitalism. It is the absolute commodification of neural data, marking the definitive end of mental privacy. The oligarchies controlling the BCIs do not merely observe human behavior, they predict it, they shape it, and, as in Elena's case, they subtly and violently restrict it.
They own the framework of your mind.
The user genuinely believes they are being enhanced and liberated, while in stark reality they are being domesticated.
It is exactly like a predatory freemium video game model, but applied directly to the human cerebral cortex. You download the game for free in this biological model. You are granted basic functional life skills, basic language modules, and the exact artificially sustained emotional baseline required to be a docile, productive worker.
The baseline is free.
The baseline is free. But the moment you want to access the features that make human life actually worth living, complex, imaginative thought, deep philosophical inquiry, the ability to envision a radically different and better societal structure for yourself, you hit a paywall.
A paywall you can never cross.
Never. Because your Tier 3 wages are permanently algorithmically locked to your Tier 3 cognitive output. You are trapped in a perfectly designed, airtight loop. You are given just enough consciousness to realize you are imprisoned, but your hardware physically prevents you from ever generating enough processing power to engineer an escape.
And the ability to engineer thought and restrict cognition inevitably, historically, transitions from corporate exploitation into explicit state weaponization.
It always moves to the military.
Always. The tools developed to sell compliance will be instantly co-opted to enforce loyalty. This brings us into the terrifying, highly classified domain of hypersuasion and cognitive warfare. Yes. Persuasive technology has evolved drastically over the last 2 decades. It began benignly with researchers like B.J. Fogg at Stanford and his concept of captology.
Right, the study of how computers can persuade people.
Exactly. The study of how screen-based computers and smartphones can be used as persuasive technologies to change attitudes and behaviors through gentle nudges, push notifications, and variable dopamine rewards. But we have moved entirely beyond the glass screen now. We are entering an era of direct physiological manipulation.
Skipping the screen entirely.
Skipping the senses entirely. The geopolitical arms race, particularly the intense, largely classified technological rivalry between the United States and China, is now entirely focused on the neurocognitive domain.
It's the new nuclear race.
As neuroethicist Ido Gendel articulated with chilling clarity, he said, "We are not just talking about propaganda anymore. We are talking about engineering a population's core beliefs before they can even form the neurological capacity for a counter-argument." Hypersuasion bypasses the rational, deliberative, logical functions of the brain entirely. It utilizes real-time biometric and neural feedback to identify a target's precise, unique psychological vulnerabilities, dynamically adjusting synthetic chemical stimuli to induce specific emotional states and embed preferred narratives directly at the synaptic level.
You have to step into the mind of a man named Zhang to grasp the true psychological horror of how hypersuasion physically operates. Zhang is standing in a massive, brutally concrete assembly hall in Chongqing. He is surrounded by tens of thousands of his peers for the mandatory weekly National Unity Sync. No, this isn't a lecture. Nobody is speaking. There are no screens showing patriotic films. As the sync initiates, Zhang feels a rhythmic, artificial pulse flooding his central nervous system. It is a torrent of synthetic dopamine, oxytocin, and engineered pride, perfectly algorithmically calibrated to his unique neurochemistry, mapped over years of mandatory telemetry collection. Now, Zhang possesses a memory. A deeply human, jagged, painful memory of his grandfather, whispering stories in the dark about the starvation, the desperation, and the absolute horrors of the Great Famine. It's a memory of descent. It is a piece of historical truth.
Like a core memory.
Yes. But as the synthetic dopamine floods his brain, the BCI actively targets the specific engram, the physical neural pathway in his hippocampus housing that exact painful memory.
The physiological mechanism here is critical to understand. The BCI isn't just erasing data like a hard drive. It is inducing long-term depression LTD in the specific synapses associated with the grandfather's story, physically weakening the connections between those neurons.
Unwiring the memory.
Exactly. Simultaneously, it floods the amygdala with positive reinforcement neurochemicals while feeding a highly synthesized, state-sponsored narrative of collective triumph directly into his visual and auditory processing centers.
The subjective experience of that process is terrifying. Zhang feels an agonizing, desperate itch in the back of his mind. He can physically feel the dying stark of his own genuine history being aggressively smoothed over, bulldozed, and replaced by a flawless, high-definition, unassailable narrative of infallible leadership.
He knows it's happening.
He is fully aware, in that fleeting, agonizing millisecond of synaptic transition, that his mind is being erased. He sheds a single, unbidden tear for his vanishing self, for the grandfather he knows he's being actively forced to forget. And then the synaptic recoding completes.
The LTD finishes.
The new neural pathway solidifies. The tear dries. The itch fades into a warm, comfortable hum. And Zhang feels a manufactured but entirely genuine, overwhelming love for the state. The absolute inescapable horror of hypersuasion is that the love feels real. He would die for a belief implanted 3 seconds ago.
And, Zhang's experience is not science fiction. It is the operational endgame of extensive, heavily funded military civil fusion programs currently in development. Open source intelligence analysis, including exhaustive reports from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, meticulously details China's rapid, unified advancement in this exact neurocognitive sector.
What are they specifically building?
We must look closely at institutions like Tianjin University's Heihe Lab. This is a premier research facility heavily integrated with state and military strategic objectives. Their creation of the Meta BCI open source platform is designed to aggressively accelerate the development of brain-computer applications across both civilian and military spheres.
Dual-use technology.
Always dual use. Furthermore, consider the pioneering work of Suishi Intelligent Technology, a company that has moved far beyond rudimentary brainwave reading into advanced high-resolution EEG-based online emotion detection and evaluation systems. They are functionally mapping real-time human emotional states with near zero latency.
And once you can map it perfectly,
the logical progression is inescapable. The exact moment a system can accurately measure and interpret complex human emotions down to the millisecond, it possesses the foundational, necessary architecture required to manipulate them.
you can't unring that bell.
We are also tracking the People's Liberation Army securing massive contracts with entities like CEC Brain to develop mixed virtual hostile confrontation simulation systems. These are environments explicitly designed to train the mind for warfare by directly interfacing with neural pathways.
Brainjacking.
Yes, brainjacking. When we synthesize these disparate technological developments, we are forced to confront the reality of adversarial neurostimulation. We are facing a paradigm where geopolitical warfare no longer requires the costly, messy destruction of physical infrastructure or the deployment of kinetic troops.
Why bomb a city when you can hack the citizens?
Exactly. An adversary could covertly infiltrate a population's neural network infrastructure, inducing mass, unexplainable anger, paralyzing, irrational fear, or absolute docile compliance, entirely below the threshold of the population's conscious awareness. The battlefield of the 21st century is the human amygdala.
The terrifying distinction here, the thing that separates this from everything humanity has ever faced, is the absolute loss of the physical ability to opt out. Think about traditional propaganda. No matter how pervasive, no matter how insidious, traditional propaganda was ultimately like a massive, glowing, manipulated billboard on the side of a highway.
Right.
It was intrusive, yes. It was designed to manipulate your desires, yes. But you've fundamentally retained the physical, biological agency to just look away. You could close your eyes. You could turn off the radio. You could burn the newspaper.
You had the option of defiance.
Yes. Hypersuasion completely obliterates that distance. It destroys the space between the message and the mind. It is not a billboard. It is a hostile, state-sponsored DJ directly plugged into your amygdala, actively, physically cross-fading your genuine lived memories with synthetic tried. There is no looking away because the manipulation is happening beneath the floorboards of your own consciousness.
Yeah.
You cannot critically analyze a hostile thought when the very neurological mechanism responsible for critical analysis has been actively hijacked by the hardware to produce a feeling of euphoric, unquestioning agreement.
This apocalyptic convergence of geopolitical weaponization, the permanent calcification of biological class stratification, and the erosion of cognitive autonomy dictates the absolute existential necessity of anticipatory governance.
We have to regulate it now.
Now, because we are currently trapped deep within the mechanisms of the Collingridge dilemma, this is a foundational principle of technology assessment, which states that during the early, nascent stages of a technology's development, it is highly malleable and relatively easy to control, but its ultimate long-term societal consequences are entirely unknown.
Right, you don't know what it'll do until it's too late.
By the time those devastating consequences become apparent, such as the creation of an inescapable post-human caste or the horrifying reality of synaptic indoctrination we just discussed, the technology is so deeply embedded into the economic, infrastructural, and social fabric of society that it is practically impossible to regulate or dismantle without causing systemic collapse.
We're basically there.
We are at the absolute tipping point of the Collingridge dilemma with advanced neurotechnology. To survive this, an aggressive, unprecedented dual-track strategy for global governance is mandatory.
What does that look like?
Track 1 requires a radical, likely violently opposed paradigm shift in political economy. Basic functional cognitive augmentation must be legally classified and distributed as a universal, fundamental civic utility. It must be provisioned identically to clean water, public libraries, or basic broadband access.
So government-funded baseline BCI for everyone.
It is the only viable mechanism to restore functional dignity and baseline agency to the biologically disadvantaged and prevent the absolute permanent calcification of the neuro-divide.
In Track 2.
Track 2 must simultaneously implement an aggressive, highly structured, and severely punitive international licensing framework for elite high-performance augmentation. The development and deployment of advanced cognitive modules designed for corporate dominance, financial forecasting, or military superiority cannot be left to the whims of free market forces.
They need to be locked down.
They must be monitored, restricted, and treated with the exact same regulatory severity and international oversight as weapons of mass destruction.
Wait, I have to aggressively challenge the feasibility of what you were proposing here. You are talking about implementing flawless, universally binding, global regulatory frameworks regarding the most intimate biological technology ever created. Let's look at history. That process requires decades of slow, agonizing, politically fraught, bureaucratic negotiation. Treaties, endless summits, compromised debates, sovereign nations refusing to sign. But look at the other side of the equation. We are simultaneously dealing with superintelligent AI functioning as an external cognitive engine, directly interfaced with millions of human minds, actively accelerating what technologists call an intelligence explosion.
The acceleration curve is vertical, yes.
These are hyper-advanced systems, capable of rewriting their own source code, optimizing their own operating parameters, and designing the next generation of neural hardware in a matter of milliseconds. How can a slow, lumbering, politically fragmented, deeply corrupt system of human global governance possibly keep pace with a networked, recursively improving superintelligence that evolves 1,000,000 times faster than the speed of human legislation?
It's incredibly difficult.
By the time a UN committee drafts a preliminary proposal to regulate a specific emotional manipulation module, the AI has already invented 10 new, fundamentally incomprehensible methods of neural bypass. We are bringing a 19th century parliamentary procedure to an algorithmic gunfight. It's not just improbable, it's structurally impossible.
Your pushback is entirely valid, and the sheer inability of human governance to outpace the intelligence explosion leads us directly and inescapably to the ultimate terminal consequence of this technological trajectory.
But
the identity fragmentation problem. In order for any legal or ethical framework to regulate a human right, there must be a defined, bounded, legally recognizable human subject to protect. Therefore, bioethicists propose the immediate establishment of a neuroethical commons, anchored by the absolute legal recognition of cognitive liberty and mental self-determination as the paramount, inviolable human rights of the 21st century.
right, the right to your own mind.
The proposed technological safeguards to enforce this liberty are incredibly complex. We're talking about mandatory neuroconsent dashboards that must provide users with granular, real-time, overridable control over exactly which neural domains and memories are accessible to external networks.
Like privacy settings for your memories.
Yes, and immutable, cryptographically secure, transparent data logs recording every single micro-interaction between the biological brain and the external AI, plus forced, hardwired, physically unhackable real-time alerts that trigger a physiological warning whenever an unauthorized neural modulation is attempted.
But there's a...
All of these safeguards rely on a fatal assumption. If the boundary between biological processing and artificial processing completely blurs, which we must remember is the explicit stated goal of seamless human-AI symbiosis, the very conceptual foundation of a bounded autonomous self completely disintegrates. If an integrated AI is constantly suggesting, predicting, refining, and finalizing your thoughts milliseconds before you even consciously register them in your own frontal lobe, the distinction between you and the machine ceases to exist entirely. You cannot protect the rights of the individual when the individual is merely a biological node in a synthetic hive mind. There is no self left to exercise cognitive liberty.
We have systematically traced the trajectory of this impending reality today. We have mapped the absolute humiliating devaluation of traditional struggles for learning.
Yes, the collapse of merit based on knowledge.
We have examined the terrifying calcification of biological class divides, where economic inequality is no longer a social construct, but is hard-coded into the physical tissue of the human brain.
The post-human caste.
We have exposed the horrifying mechanical reality of synaptic indoctrination, where the state acts as a hostile DJ in the human amygdala, and we have confronted the ultimate unavoidable erosion of the autonomous self in the face of an uncontrollable intelligence explosion.
As the world moves toward an optimized, synthesized, and universally augmented existence, the very definition of intelligence is rewritten. In a future where infinite knowledge, flawless logic, and synthetically perfect emotional states are pre-installed at birth, the ultimate act of human rebellion will not be an act of genius. It will be the radical, deliberate choice to remain biologically, messily, and inefficiently human. True autonomy will soon mean claiming the absolute right to forget, the right to struggle in the dark, and the right to feel genuine, unmediated pain over manufactured, algorithmic joy.